No matter how you think or feel about Cyberpunk 2077, and it was a disaster. It was a complete and utter shit show. But CDPR don't care. They are being bullish. They've just decided, you know what? No, that is going to be one misstep in the path to our RPG world domination. And unlike a lot of companies who kind of go, hey, we're working on something, they basically just said, here's everything we're doing for the next 6 years. Please look forward to it. As soon as the bad press from Cyberpunk started to kind of fade, once the Edgerunners update came out, Edgerunners absolutely lit a fire under the franchise, drove sales and player stats really super high. Now it's time for them to get investor confidence back. Now it's time for them to get developers to want to come back, because that was one of the problems with them working on their internal engine. It was just, oh, developers aren't having a great time here. And they also need players, because obviously more than anything else, they need players. They need their customers to be like, okay, what's next? And they've answered that. It's an incredibly ambitious timeline of expansions, at least one expansion for Cyberpunk, and multiple games in all of their existing franchises and one new one. So they have 3 new stated goals. One is 3 enduring franchises. That will be Witcher, Cyberpunk, and their new one. And more content for gamers with memorable single-player experiences and multiplayer experiences. So it's about time, because they've not done anything multiplayer. They seem to be actually, in the same way Sony's kind of going, hey, we've got single player and we need to get multiplayer live services. It seems that without the live service part, CDPR definitely want multiplayer as part of their portfolio going forward. But then, of course, their third goal is, we saw it with Edgerunners, we saw it with Netflix and The Witcher, mobile TV, film, and more in association with external partners. And that's something that has worked out so unbelievably well for them, to the point where Arcane for Riot was an exceptional piece of work. But honestly, without seeing numbers, it's hard to know who've been more successful, CDPR or Riot. They've both been successful, but CDPR kind of knocking it out of the park with a lot less resources. And that's absolutely fascinating. Their mission statement then is, we create revolutionary role-playing games with memorable stories that inspire gamers. And obviously that's just waffle, but you know, it is what it is. They also gave an update, and the Witcher series, that includes all of the Witcher games so far, is now at 65 million sales, and Cyberpunk's at 20. You know, obviously you're going to see Witcher 3 is probably a disproportionate amount of that, even though 1 and 2 are cheaper. I don't know how many people would have specifically bought them, especially with the console availability. But even then, Cyberpunk at 20, a third of the Witcher, a third of The Witcher. That's still absolutely phenomenal, and that is up there with some of the other platforms, the other publishers' biggest hits. 20 million is a lot of sales. But all of this comes from a presentation they gave for their investors, and its focus is on growth and expansion. Particularly, they definitely know they need staff. And that's the thing with the whole game industry at the minute, right? You've got Activision Blizzard throwing money at devs. We need that. EA are doing the same, and they're, Andrew Wilson's going up and standing up and saying, yes, we at EA, we have all of this money, we have all of this this talent, we have reasons for people to want to come to work here, we're not worried about that. When CEOs are saying things like, we're not worried about getting staff to come to us, we're very good at it, that implies that, everyone else, and even they, should probably be worried. You need so much development to make games like open world games. You need so many devs. So then, a flood of RPGs. We've got Sirius, the new Witcher trilogy, and Canis Majoris, all from the Witcher franchise. We've got Phantom Liberty, the expansion to Cyberpunk 2077, and then Orion, which is another Cyberpunk game. And then there's also Hadar, which is a new IP entirely by CDPR. And that ultimately ends up being, I guess, technically 8 new games, because one of them's a trilogy. From CDPR themselves, you've got the Witcher trilogy, the new one coming up. You've got the expansion, that's them internally, and Orion is also them internally, but not them internally in Poland. That's them moving to, I believe it's Boston, to set up a new North America-based studio, because now that coast of America is where there's going to be a lot of devs moving out of California, moving maybe even down from Canada, where a lot of Ubisoft stuff are based, in Montreal. You've got this new hub for loads of super talented, especially devs that are kind of getting tired of living in LA. Can we live somewhere a bit more made for humans, please? And I don't know how much better the likes of Boston would be for that, but fundamentally they're moving out of the biggest cities and moving into more more, it's not exactly middle America, but getting closer to that vibe, for obviously to save money, to get to less populated areas, to get where, developers are coming up out of, where there's good universities and stuff like that. So that's why they're doing that, but they'll be the ones building Orion, which is a Cyberpunk sequel. And then hard to know what the new IP is, Hadar, Hadar, but it's by them internally. But then that leaves the other two games, Sirius and Canis Majoris. Sirius is by the Molasses Flood, who is the studio that they bought. A new narrative RPG that they said something about it, you know, pushing the boundaries of what narrative games can do and telling stories in new ways. And then there's Canis Majoris, which is by another third party that they haven't announced yet, and I'm not actually sure who that could be. Maybe like a couple of years ago, we'd have been able to say, okay, well, here's all the available studios that they would want to work with. But now there are so many cropping up out of the woodwork, it's genuinely hard to tell. It used to be they would collab with big studios. But now it's like, could Canis Majoris be like a AA dev or even an indie developer given a huge amount of money? It's hard to know, but realistically only time will tell. What we can get here is all of these have some sort of connection to the stars. Sirius, Orion, Canis Majoris. They're all, you know, constellations or stars. I don't know if there's much to read into there, but fundamentally it is them just kind of going, yeah, I don't know, there's probably something to it. You know how code names can be really kind of, for lack of a better word, we've been wanky at times. I think the most interesting one so far is probably Orion, the new Cyberpunk game. That's a code name for the sequel, and it will continue harnessing the potential of this dark future universe, apparently. It will not be made by CDPR in Poland, but it will be in Boston with staff from Vancouver. It won't be an entirely fresh team. The quest director of Cyberpunk, Pavel Shishko, will be leading a team out to the Americas, including some core staff. So it's not just build a new studio from scratch. It's kind of split the existing studio a little bit, take a delegation to go over and plant the seeds, and then build this new place. And also we did have a nice little let's fucking go to go along with that. So clearly pretty excited for that. So just them expanding the development, right? Because they don't want to fall into the trap of make one game. Oh, that game took like 5 years to make. I guess we'll make another game. It's all their parallel development that they've talked about. The idea of, hey, yeah, we're going to have so many studios. We're going to have so many developers that we will be able to go, hey, here's The Witcher, and then here's Cyberpunk a year or two later. Here's Hadar the next year or two later. Well, again, especially then any CDPR titles in future will be made with Unreal Engine 5. So all of the Nightmare stuff from P77 should be gone. Unreal Engine 5 should be a substantially better thing to work in and allow them to get more devs, because obviously you've got all that training period of in an internal engine, whereas you're like, hey, every developer on the planet should probably know Unreal Engine 5, so no or less training time, less startup time, just in, bang, get to work, stuff like that. On to The Witcher then with Canis Majoris. It's a full-fledged Witcher game, separate to the new Witcher saga. It's an external studio, but this one's headed by experienced developers who have worked on past Witcher games. So that's a case of they kept in touch with the people who left, and then later on went, hey, you wanna work on Witcher? No, don't come back. We'll just give the project to you. So we do know that Rebel Wolves aren't making it, and Marcin Jeffmau's team aren't making it either. So who that actually leaves, I honestly don't know, and no one's really been able to figure that out just yet, but it is a story-driven, single-player, open-world RPG. That's the good news. This isn't some bullshit live service or some kind of weird side game. This is full-on. This is a big Witcher game. Please look forward to it. And according to the investor call, we'll be getting this reveal soon, really soon. Whatever that means in game industry terms. The next one then is Polaris, which is the new Witcher trilogy. Again, story-driven open world RPGs, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Currently in pre-production, 150 plus team from CDPR. Soon it will be bam, bam, bam. They're not going for a trilogy in the sense of, hey, we'll make one game and then we'll potter about and figure out what it is. They've planned these 3 games, and they're going to go all 3 games in a 6-year period after the first game's release, which more or less means every 3 years, right? And then Canis Majoris will be coming in at some point in the middle of that. So that'll be, starting maybe 2025, maybe? It'll just be a Witcher game every 2 years for the next 6 years. That's their plan for world domination. And so far, it seems like it'll work. Sirius then is a game that's created by the Molasses Flood and created with support from CDPR. It will have multiplayer gameplay, which will be kind of a first for them, on top of a single player experience, which is campaign quest story, because I think they know that no one wants to buy a multiplayer only Witcher game, and that will be probably a couple of years down the line because it's still in pre-production. But it is also, Molasses Flood, they were the Flame and the Flood, and then Drake Hollow guys. So there's a decent bit of experience in the vibe, the atmosphere, and the multiplayer gameplay. So everything looking up for Witcher and looking up for Cyberpunk. But that leaves us to the entirely distinct third IP that is Hadar or Hadar. And that will be that something they've been incubating for the past year or so. It will not be a licensed property, because obviously Cyberpunk comes from the pen and paper RPG and The Witcher comes from the novel series. This will be something they're completely doing themselves. But it also is potentially kind of fantasy. It's weird because it's a reference to an eldritch god from D&D. based on the stars, so it's kind of hard to know what that will be outside of VGC collecting quotes from the investor call and figuring out it's an RPG and we won't know anything for a long time. They're still like building the setting, which is something you do at the very, very start of ideation. So that'll be a long time out. And the last news on games is that they're introducing multiplayer to most of their new games to enrich the single player experience, which doesn't make any sense, but it's investor talk. Fundamentally, if it's multiplayer that's well considered, that's fine. But I think one of the things I'm definitely worried about is going back to the past of, remember whenever a game just had multiplayer for no good reason, and most of it was utterly garbage? There's a couple that worked, like Ratchet and Clank 3's multiplayer magically being really good somehow. But beyond that, hopefully it's like well designed and well considered. But it should be hopefully easy enough to actually make for them as well, and not take a lot of dev time out. Hopefully it is just, here's a multiplayer mode to piss about in, as opposed to fully focused. But the next thing we need to talk about then is maybe the more exciting part for the industry as a whole, because obviously more games is great, but more exciting overall, now it's starting to work for people, is the transmedia plan. Because historically transmedia has been kind of garbage. Here's a movie we outsourced, and then you end up getting like the mid-2000s Resident Evil movies. You're like, why does this exist? But recently, certain companies have been doing it very, very right, and CDPR have been absolutely the best. So their goals here are to join forces with the best external teams, to deploy dedicated franchise management, which is very important to make sure, you know, your tone is right, your like actual story, your plot, your canon is right and makes sense and actually works overall, instead of just being, here's a list of game characters, try your best, which is basically the worst case. They're also opening up to a wider range of products, and now you get ready to sigh, expanding their approach to mobile games, which is what it is. It's so much money in that market, everyone's going to go in. You just have to hope they're at least okay and not like predatory or exploitative. But I think CDPR kind of know this. So they called out Edge Runner being a success, but then also Cyberpunk and The Witcher have so many like comics, books, and general merchandising that it just works for them. In the same way that Square Enix have that success over in the East by just merchandising the hell out of everything and having all their spin-offs and tie-ins and stuff. That just works for really good IP with really good settings. And obviously those two, Witcher and Cyberpunk, have that by default. So that's clearly going to work super well. So them going into that more makes complete sense. Then we've kind of also seen what they're doing for mobile games with Gwent, Thronebreaker, and Roach Race, as well as the externally produced AR game, The Witcher Monster Slayer. I don't think basically any of those are particularly successful, but as long as they're kind of going. Ultimately, the point here is that CDPR are pumping. They do not give a shit anymore that Cyberpunk was, basically a kick in the teeth. They definitely just wrecked themselves in terms of opinion and public appearance. So ironically, Edge Runners has taken the edge off that. So that's now time for them to kind of earn their thing back. But as we always say, for any company that pulls the wool over the eyes of players and makes something as catastrophic as Cyberpunk, because obviously, game being flawed but still have a good core aside, the way they released that on the consoles is literally that was completely unprecedented when it was removed from the PlayStation Store. That was full on unprecedented levels of, this is a shit experience. You pulled the wool over your eyes. You shouldn't have sold this. So it's going to be difficult to keep that in mind while also kind of going, oh, hey, all of this stuff does look good. That's fundamentally the takeaway. All of this stuff does look good. It looks like they've got their priorities relatively straight. All we have to do is keep an eagle eye on how they release their games in the future, how they promise their games, how they market their games. But they've kind of earned a second chance, or at least they're starting to show that they will try to earn it and know that they need to communicate to players that their next work is actually going to be there, and that was a mistake. Much like Activision Blizzard have completely destroyed their reputation, and that will take a decade of no fuck-ups to make right again. I think CDPR can get away with the expansion to Cyberpunk being good and the next Witcher game also being pretty good. I think the combination of silence, a small amount of patches, and just letting people cool down and forgive a little bit, and that's worked for them. Because for how much people were dragging CDPR, and this isn't even a personal opinion, for how much people were dragging CDPR when Cyberpunk released and for the first 6 months after that, the response to this has been profoundly positive. Everyone's going, we'll take your word for it. We'll see what you've got. Honestly, if it means a whole bunch of story-driven open world RPGs to the quality that CDPR usually or could put out with all of this money and all of this talent that they're building, then hell yeah, that's it. We're in for good ass times in AAA games. Theoretically. It could all go horribly, horribly wrong. But Let's hope not. Let's hope not. Thank you very much for watching today. That's more or less it. There's maybe a couple more things, but that's the gist of the story, right? CDPR making games, transmedia narratives. People have started to forgive them a little bit, even though they probably shouldn't have. That's my summary. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.